The first scream happened on a Tuesday night, and no one heard it, because the lights were already out. And by the time the power came back, the front door was marked.
Welcome to Horror Audiobook.
This is not a story about a killer hiding in the dark. This is a story about a neighborhood that believed darkness made them safer, until the blackout became permission. For 7 nights, Lockwood Street had no power, no cameras, no alarms, no witnesses. And every morning, another door was carved with the same symbol. They thought the murders were random. They thought the killer was escalating. They were wrong. He wasn't escalating. He was rehearsing. And the final performance was scheduled inside a house that still believed it was safe. This is The Butcher of Lockwood Street. Chapter 1. When the lights went out, so did the rules. The explosion sounded like the sky cracking open. It was 9:42 p.m. on a Tuesday when the transformer at the end of Lockwood Street burst in a shower of blue-white sparks. The sound wasn't thunder. It wasn't fireworks. It was metallic and violent, a snapping, electrical roar that rattled windows and set off car alarms in a synchronized scream. Then the street went black. Not dim. Not flickering. Black. Porch lights blinked out. Televisions died mid-sentence. Refrigerators exhaled their final hum. Even the faint amber glow from the cul-de-sac's lone street lamp vanished, leaving the neighborhood suspended in a depthless dark that felt thick enough to touch. For a moment there was silence. Then came the dogs. They began barking in staggered bursts, confused and frantic, as if the absence of light had weight. Curtains shifted. Front doors cracked open. Phone screens lit up like fireflies in the sudden void. Inside her 2-story colonial at number 17, Mara Ellison stood motionless in her kitchen, her hand still resting on the refrigerator door handle. The milk carton slipped slightly in her grip. She waited. The house, stripped of its usual electrical murmur, sounded different, larger. The quiet felt invasive. From somewhere outside, a neighbor shouted, "What the hell was that?" Another voice answered, brittle with forced calm, "Transformer probably, it'll come back." Mara set the milk down and walked to the front window. She didn't turn on her phone flashlight. She preferred to let her eyes adjust. In the darkness, Lockwood Street felt unfamiliar, like a photograph of itself after something had been erased. Across the street, silhouettes gathered on lawns. People who normally waved from driveways now stood closer than usual, their bodies angled inward as if forming a circle around a campfire that didn't exist. Within minutes, the neighborhood group chat buzzed. "Power outage. Anyone else hear that?" Called the city. They said 24 hours max. 24 hours. The phrase moved from screen to mouth with surprising speed. Within 15 minutes, 3 separate neighbors had repeated it aloud. By 10 o'clock, it had hardened into fact. "It'll be fixed within 24 hours. Mara watched as flashlights flickered across asphalt. Someone laughed too loud, too eager. There was comfort in shared inconvenience. An unexpected blackout felt almost nostalgic. People joked about board games, about roughing it. No one noticed how dark the sky truly was. Lockwood Street sat far enough from the city center that it didn't receive much ambient glow. Without porch lights and street lamps, the night swallowed the houses whole. The cul-de-sac's circular design, once charming and neighborly, now resembled something else. A bowl. Or a trap. Hours passed, though outside, the night stayed the same. By 11, most doors had closed again. Candles burned in windows. Generators hummed in 2 of the larger homes, the Whitakers at number 9 and the retired dentist at number 4. Their backup lights glowed like private islands in a dark sea. Mara did not own a generator. She moved through her house slowly, lighting 2 candles and placing one in the upstairs hallway. Shadows crawled along the walls as the flame trembled. She paused at her security panel near the garage door. No power. No cameras. No motion alerts. For years, Lockwood Street had prided itself on being secure. Neighborhood watch signs decorated lawns like ornamental warnings. Doorbell cameras blinked from nearly every entryway. Now they were blind. Mara stepped into her living room and looked at her own reflection in the dark television screen. For the first time since moving here 3 years ago, she felt unobserved. And that unsettled her more than she expected. Across the street, a flashlight beam swept slowly across houses, not random, methodical. It paused at doors, windows, driveways. Probably just someone checking on things, she told herself. Probably. By midnight, a second message from the city circulated. Crews dispatched, estimated restoration within 24 hours. The same phrase. Reassuring in its repetition. But repetition can also be a lullaby. The next morning arrived gray and overcast. The power had not returned. Coffee shops downtown were crowded with displaced residents charging devices and trading mild complaints. On Lockwood Street, however, something subtle had shifted. Without garage doors gliding open on schedule and morning news anchors filling kitchens with noise, the neighborhood felt exposed, raw. Myra stood on her porch with a travel mug of lukewarm instant coffee and watched her neighbors. The Whitakers argued in hushed tones near their SUV. Mrs. Jennings from number 12 clutched her purse tightly while speaking to a police officer who had stopped by to check in. Two teenagers who normally blasted music while waiting for the school bus now stood in silence, their eyes scanning the tree line at the end of the block. Every sound carried further, without electrical hum to soften it. A screen door closing echoed. A cough sounded amplified. And beneath it all was a tension that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. By afternoon, rumors bloomed. Someone claimed the explosion looked intentional. Someone else swore they'd seen a van parked near the transformer earlier that evening. Another neighbor insisted crime always spikes during outages. Facts dissolved into speculation. Speculation hardened into suspicion. That evening, Mara attended an impromptu gathering at the center of the cul-de-sac. Lawn chairs formed a loose circle. Flashlights rested on laps like weapons. "We should organize shifts," Mr. Whitaker suggested, "just until power's back." "It'll be back within 24 hours, someone muttered. A pause followed. Because it had already been nearly 24 hours. Mara watched faces in the dimming light. Without porch bulbs to illuminate expressions, people looked older, harder. Every passing car beyond the entrance of Lockwood Street drew synchronized stares. A dog barked again. This time no one laughed. Darkness settled faster that second night, thicker. The generators at numbers 9 and 4 hummed again, but instead of comforting, their glow felt isolating, like they belonged to a different street entirely. Mara locked her front door at 9:00 p.m. Then she locked it again. Upstairs, she paused in the hallway listening. The house creaked in the cooling air, wood contracting, pipes adjusting. Normal sounds, yet stripped of background noise, each one felt intentional. Outside, footsteps moved along the sidewalk. Slow, measured. Her breath caught. She approached the window carefully and lifted the curtain an inch. A beam of light slid across her neighbor's front door. Not jittery. Deliberate. The beam lingered at the handle. Then moved on. Probably someone checking for vandalism. Probably. But Mara felt something cold settle behind her ribs. Because the flashlight hadn't swept randomly. It had examined. And in that stillness, an understanding began to form, quiet, unwelcome. Darkness doesn't create monsters. It removes consequences. The power company sent another update at 11:13 p.m. Restoration expected within 24 hours. The same phrase. The same promise. Outside, the flashlight beam returned. This time it paused at her door and didn't move for a very long time. The night stretched, unblinking, and somewhere at the far end of Lockwood Street, metal scraped softly against metal, a sound too controlled to be an accident. Mara didn't sleep, because for the first time since moving there, Lockwood Street didn't feel like a neighborhood. It felt like an opportunity, and someone was learning its layout. The next morning, one of the front doors would be marked. But tonight, the street was only rehearsing, and the lights were still out. Chapter 2. The first door was marked at 3:17 a.m. At 3:17 a.m., Lockwood Street learned the difference between darkness and silence. The scream did not echo. It fractured. It began somewhere deep inside number 12. The Jennings house, sharp and strangled, cut short as if a hand had closed around it mid-breath. But without power, without streetlights, without porch lamps to anchor direction, the sound scattered. It slipped between houses and dissolved into the trees at the end of the cul-de-sac. No one was certain where it came from, and that uncertainty would matter later. Inside her bedroom, Mara Ellison's eyes snapped open. She lay still. Her digital clock was blank, a dark rectangle on the nightstand. Only her phone screen, when she tilted it, offered a cold blue glow. 3:18 a.m. For a moment, she convinced herself it had been a dream, the mind misfiring in unfamiliar quiet. Then she heard something else. A door. Not slamming. Closing. Softly. Deliberately. The kind of sound someone makes when they don't want to be heard. Her pulse climbed into her throat. Outside, a dog began barking, frantic, high-pitched. Another joined, then another, a chain reaction of alarm rippling outward from number 12. Mara moved to the window, careful not to silhouette herself. She lifted the curtain a fraction. The Jennings porch was dark, but something glinted on their front door. It caught what little moonlight filtered through the clouds, a thin, wet shine. At 3:24 a.m., someone finally called 911. At 3:31 a.m., sirens cut through Lockwood Street like blades. Red and blue strobes splashed across siding and shutters, transforming the quiet suburban facades into something grotesque. Neighbors stepped onto lawns in pajamas and bathrobes, faces drained and luminous in the emergency lights. Myra joined them. The Jennings front door stood half open, and carved into the red wood, deep, gouged, deliberate, was a symbol. It wasn't random vandalism. It wasn't graffiti. It was precise. A hooked vertical line intersected by 3 shorter slashes, each evenly spaced. The cuts were clean, edges sharp, wood curled outward like peeled skin. Someone had taken time. The smell reached them next. Copper and something heavier. Inside, officers moved quickly, their flashlights darting across walls. A paramedic emerged first, face stiff, eyes avoiding the crowd. "Go back inside," an officer instructed, "please." No one did. Mrs. Whittaker whispered, "Oh my God," over and over again, as if repetition might soften it. Myra didn't look away from the symbol, because it didn't feel like rage. It felt like intention. By sunrise, Lockwood Street was no longer inconvenienced. It was invaded. The official statement arrived mid-morning: home invasion, multiple fatalities, investigation ongoing. No mention of the carving. No mention of the precision. "It's probably gang-related," someone suggested in the growing knot of neighbors. "There are break-ins during blackouts," another added. "It'll be fixed within 24 hours," Mr. Whitaker repeated, though his voice had lost conviction. 24 hours. Now the phrase sounded brittle. Police canvassed houses, knocking gently but firmly. When they reached Mara's door, she noticed something odd. The officer's flashlight lingered not on her windows but on her locks. "See anything unusual?" he asked. She hesitated. She thought of the beam of light the night before, how it had paused at her handle. "No," she said carefully, "just the noise." He nodded, scribbled, moved on. Across the street, crime scene tape fluttered weakly in the breeze. Without electricity, it was the brightest thing on the block, a line of yellow against muted siding. Around noon, curiosity overcame caution. While officers shifted positions and reporters gathered at the entrance of the street, Mara stepped closer to number 12. She kept her distance from the threshold. But the carving was deeper than she'd first thought. The vertical stroke wasn't just cut, it was measured. The spacing between the three smaller lines was exact, equal. Not chaotic. Deliberate. She crouched slightly, studying the base of the door. The cuts were clean, no splintering beyond the edges. The blade had been sharp. Sharp and controlled. "Don't get too close." She startled at the voice behind her. It was Daniel Harper from number 14, software engineer, recently divorced, perpetually anxious. "You think he's still around?" Daniel whispered. The word "he" lingered between them. Mara didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained on the symbol. It didn't look finished. It looked like part of something. That evening the power remained out. The generators hummed again, fewer this time. The dentist at number 4 had shut his off after running out of fuel. Only the Whitakers' home glowed faintly now, a lone beacon in deepening dark. Police presence decreased after sunset. Budget constraints. Limited manpower. Lockwood Street was advised to stay vigilant. Vigilant. As if awareness alone could substitute for illumination. By 9:00 p.m., doors shut earlier than the night before. Conversations were shorter. Windows remained covered. The air felt different. Heavy. Mara walked through her house performing small rituals, checking locks, testing window latches, sliding a chair beneath the back door handle. She paused at her front door. Her fingers hovered inches from the wood. She imagined the blade biting into it, the steady pressure, the patience. This was not impulsive violence. It was rehearsal. Outside, footsteps moved again along the sidewalk. Slow. Measured. Her chest tightened. The beam of a flashlight slid across her living room curtains, then drifted to the neighbor's house. Then to the Whitakers. Then back to the Jennings' blood-darkened door. As if reviewing. As if comparing. Darkness doesn't create monsters. It removes consequences. At 11:47 p.m., a notification buzzed through the group chat. "Anyone else see someone walking?" No one responded for several minutes. Then, "Probably police. Probably media. Stay inside." The word "probably" appeared too often. Mara stood at her upstairs window again. She watched as the flashlight beam stopped at number 9, the Whitakers' generator-lit home. The light traced the outline of their garage, their side gate, their windows. It lingered. Then it moved on. Testing. Evaluating. Learning. The second scream would not come that night. But sleep did not return easily to Lockwood Street. Because now there was proof. Not rumor. Not speculation. Proof carved into red wood. And somewhere in the dark, someone was studying doors. At 3:17 a.m. the next morning, Mara's eyes opened again without alarm. She listened. The street held its breath, and in the distance, faint, almost thoughtful metal touched wood. Once, twice, as if marking time. The second door had not yet been carved. But it would be. And when it was, the symbol would make more sense. Because this was not rage. This was architecture. And Lockwood Street was only beginning to understand its design. Chapter 3, he wasn't choosing victim, he was testing entry points. The second house was quieter. No scream this time. No fractured sound to ripple through the dark. At 2:52 a.m., the Whittaker's generator cut out. At 3:06 a.m., the side door of number 9 opened. At 3:19 a.m., Daniel Harper from number 14 stepped onto his porch after hearing what he would later describe as a soft thud. By 3:23 a.m., Lockwood Street had its second marked door. Mara stood barefoot on cold asphalt as police lights returned, harsher now, impatient. The Whittakers' home, once the only glowing refuge, was dark, hollowed. The generator sat silent beside the garage, its panel open. Sabotaged. This time, the carved symbol was larger. Deeper. The original hooked line remained, but an additional slash had been added beneath it, extending the shape downward, as if mapping expansion. Mara stared at it, her mind replaying the flashlight beam from the night before. It had lingered here. Evaluating. Learning. Inside the Whittakers' house, officers moved with grim efficiency. No one whispered gang-related this time. No one said random. 2 houses in 2 nights. Both during the blackout. Both with doors carved after the act. But something else was different. There was minimal forced entry. The side door showed faint splintering, but not the kind produced by panic or brute strength. It looked studied. As if someone had practiced the angle. As if someone knew where to press. By mid-morning, Lockwood Street no longer resembled a neighborhood. It resembled a crime diagram. Officers photographed shoe prints, measured distances, noted that both attacks occurred within a 7-minute window of 3:17 a.m. The time was becoming a pattern. Mara retreated to her kitchen and opened her laptop, running on dwindling battery. She pulled up a digital map of the cul-de-sac. Number 12. Number 9. She placed virtual pins. They weren't random. They were adjacent along the curve. If connected, they formed the beginning of a shape. Her pulse quickened. A knock at her door jolted her. Daniel stood outside, pale and shaking. "He cut the generator," Daniel whispered once she let him in. "Clean wires, no hesitation. He knew exactly where to slice." Mara pictured the panel open, the wires parted neatly. This wasn't chaos. It was calibration. Hours passed, though outside, the sky remained dull and heavy. The city's update came again. Crews are working. Estimated restoration within 24 hours. The phrase now felt mocking. Because the killer was working too. That night, neighbors implemented patrol shifts. Flashlights, baseball bats, kitchen knives clutched too tightly. Daniel volunteered for the 1:00 a.m. to 3:00 a.m. block with 2 others. They walked the perimeter slowly, beams cutting across hedges and mailboxes. Mara watched from her upstairs window. She noticed something the others didn't. The patrols moved predictably. Clockwise. Every 20 minutes. Routine. Routine was information. At 2:11 a.m., Daniel's patrol passed the entrance of the cul-de-sac. At 2:18 a.m., they turned the corner near number 6. At 2:26 a.m., they paused briefly to talk near Mara's driveway. And at 2:33 a.m., while they stood less than 30 yards away, number 6's sliding glass door opened without resistance. The third house. The third rehearsal. No scream. Only the distant crash of something heavy falling inside. The patrols ran toward the sound, but too late. The back fence had been cut earlier. A narrow section, nearly invisible in the dark, now hung loose, creating an exit point directly into the wooded trail behind Lockwood Street. He hadn't just studied doors. He had studied response times. The third door bore the symbol again. This time, another line added. The shape was growing outward, branching along the curve of homes. Myra stood close enough to smell the raw wood fibers. 3 houses. 3 precise entries. Different access points each time. Front door. Side door. Rear glass. He wasn't choosing victims. He was testing entry points. Darkness doesn't create monsters. It removes consequences. But it also removes obstacles. Later that afternoon, Mara walked the perimeter of her own house. She examined her garage hinges, her sliding windows, the narrow basement well beneath her deck. Every house teaches him something. The phrase settled heavily in her mind. Every house teaches him something. At dusk, clouds swallowed what little light remained. The patrol groups doubled in size. Arguments flared about who was slacking and who wasn't taking it seriously enough. Mrs. Harper accused the teenagers of wandering too far. The dentist accused the Whitakers of relying too much on their generator. Trust was eroding. Fear was louder than reason. At 3:17 a.m. nothing happened. No scream. No crash. No carving. And that absence was worse, because anticipation had become a pulse. Mara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. If she were him. She stopped the thought immediately. But it lingered. If she were him, she would now know. Patrol rotation timing. Police response delay. Fence weaknesses. Generator vulnerabilities. Which houses locked side gates. Which windows were decorative and which opened. Testing. Refining. Perfecting. At 3:42 a.m. her phone buzzed. A single message in the group chat. Did anyone check number 3? The house at number 3 belonged to an elderly widow named Mrs. Calder, nearly deaf, rarely social, lights always off even before the blackout. Mara's breath went shallow, because number 3 sat exactly between 9 and 6. Completing the curve. The patrol ran. Flashlights converged. The front door was closed. For a moment, relief. Then someone noticed it. The carving. Fresh. Deep. The symbol had expanded again. But there was no blood. No broken glass. No forced entry. They pounded on the door. No answer. When police finally entered at dawn, they found Mrs. Calder alive. Shaken. Unharmed. Her doors locked. Windows sealed. Nothing stolen. Nothing disturbed. Except for the carving. He hadn't entered. He had only marked. Testing something else now. Mara stared at the growing symbol later that morning, tracing its shape on paper. 3 connected houses. Then the 4th marked but untouched. He was mapping progression. Calibrating escalation. And suddenly, she understood something that chilled her more than the killings themselves. He was improving. And rehearsals don't continue forever. They build toward opening night. That evening, as the sun dipped and Lockwood Street prepared for another powerless descent, Mara noticed something new. A faint scrape along her own front step. Not deep. Not carved. But measured. As if a blade had rested there briefly. Considering. The power company sent another update. Restoration expected within 24 hours. Mara stared at the message until the screen dimmed. 24 hours was no longer reassurance. It was a window, and someone was using it. As darkness settled once more over Lockwood Street, Mara locked her door and whispered the thought she could no longer ignore. He isn't choosing victims. He's choosing a finale. And somewhere in the trees beyond the cul-de-sac, unseen in the black, something shifted position, waiting for the next lesson. Chapter 4. The symbol wasn't a signature, it was a blueprint. By the fourth morning, Lockwood Street had stopped pretending this was random. The blackout remained. The promise remained. Restoration within 24 hours. But now the phrase felt like background noise to something more deliberate, something unfolding with mathematical patience. Mara sat at her dining room table with graph paper, a pencil, and her laptop balanced on a dying battery. Sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, pale and dusty, revealing the faint tremor in her hands. She had redrawn the symbol 3 times. Hooked vertical line. 3 slashes. Extended base. Additional downward stroke. It looked almost abstract when isolated. But isolated was the mistake. She opened the neighborhood map again and placed numbers beside the affected houses. 12, 13, 14, 15. They curved neatly along the outer rim of the cul-de-sac. Like numbers on a clock. Like vertebrae in a spine. Her pulse slowed into something colder, a clarity that felt dangerous. She rotated the map 90 degrees. The carved lines weren't random strokes. They were segments. She overlaid the shape of the carving onto the aerial layout. Her breath caught. It aligned. Not perfectly, but intentionally. The hooked vertical line matched the long bend of Lockwood Street itself. The smaller slashes mirrored the branching driveways of the marked homes. And the newest downward extension pointed inward, toward the center of the cul-de-sac, toward the homes that had not yet been touched. The symbol wasn't a signature. It was a blueprint. A knock at her door broke the silence. Mara folded the paper quickly before opening it. Daniel stood there again, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. "They're saying he skipped number 3 on purpose," Daniel said. "Mrs. Calder's door was marked, but he didn't go in." "I know. You think he got spooked?" Mara hesitated. "No," she said quietly. "I think he learned enough." Daniel frowned. The two of them walked outside together. Crime scene tape fluttered in lazy arcs. The Jennings house was now boarded. The Whitakers' windows covered in opaque plastic. Number 6 remained hollow and silent. Number 3's door bore the carving clearly in daylight. It looked almost surgical. Mara stepped closer, studying the depth of the cuts. They were consistent. Even pressure. Even spacing. This was not a man in frenzy. This was a man with patience. Behind them, Mr. Whitaker, bandaged from minor injuries during the second attack, spoke with an officer. "We need more patrols," he insisted. "We need a curfew." The officer nodded in that way people do when they can't promise anything. Because resources were thin. Because the blackout stretched citywide. Because Lockwood Street was one problem among many. But to the residents here, it was the only problem. That afternoon, Mara did something she hadn't planned. She walked the cul-de-sac slowly, counting paces between houses. Measuring. Number 12 to 9. 9 to 6. 6 to 3. Equal intervals along the arc. Her eyes lifted to the center of the circle. 5 houses remained untouched. 5. But one sat precisely at the innermost curve. Number 17. Her house. The air felt suddenly thin. She told herself it was coincidence, told herself paranoia distorts geometry. But once you see a pattern, you cannot unsee it. Darkness doesn't create monsters. It removes consequences, and it reveals design. That night the patrols changed direction, counterclockwise now, attempting unpredictability. They staggered intervals, added whistles to signal check-ins. They were reacting. But he was planning. At 1:40 a.m., Mara stood again at her upstairs window. The street was darker than ever. Clouds swallowed even the faint starlight. Without generators humming, without porch bulbs, the neighborhood resembled a row of sealed tombs. Then she saw it. No flashlight this time. Only movement. A silhouette slipping between number 6 and number 3. Low. Controlled. Familiar with the terrain. Her breath froze in her throat. The figure paused near number 3's marked door. And then, impossibly, reached out and traced the carving with gloved fingers. Not checking. Admiring. Like an artist reviewing work. Mara's stomach dropped. This wasn't about entry anymore. This was about progression. The silhouette moved along the curve, stopping briefly at each previously marked home. 12. 9. 6. 3. A pilgrimage. A confirmation. Then it turned inward. Toward the center. Toward her line of sight. She stepped back instinctively, heart hammering so loudly she feared it would draw attention. Footsteps approached slowly along the sidewalk. Not rushed. Not hiding. Measured. They stopped outside her house. Silence stretched. She could hear her own pulse. Then came the faintest sound. Metal brushing wood. Not carving. Not yet. Just resting there. Considering. Her mind raced. If the symbol mirrored the street, if the marked houses formed the outer spine, then the center would complete it. She forced herself to breathe quietly. The handle did not turn. The blade did not press. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated. But they did not return to the outer arc. They disappeared toward the wooded trail behind the cul-de-sac. Toward the escape route tested at number 6. Toward control. Hours passed, though outside the night did not change. At 3:17 a.m. no scream came. But at dawn, Lockwood Street found a new carving. Number 15. One house to the left of Mara's. No fatalities. No forced entry. Only the symbol expanded again, now forming a nearly complete inward curve. A tightening spiral. The residents gathered in stunned silence. It's random, someone insisted weakly. It has to be. Mara stared at the carving and felt something shift inside her, not fear. Understanding. He wasn't escalating randomly. He was drawing closer. Each marked door was a line segment. Each segment bent toward the same point. Her gaze lifted slowly to the center of the cul-de-sac. To her own front door. The realization wasn't loud. It was quiet. Heavy. Like a verdict already decided. The symbol wasn't a warning. It wasn't a signature. It was a map. And the map was almost complete. That evening, as neighbors argued about evacuating temporarily, Mara stood alone in her hallway, staring at her front door from the inside. She pressed her palm flat against the wood. Cool. Solid. Unmarked. For now. But she could almost feel where the blade would go. Measured. Even. Precise. Darkness doesn't create monsters. It removes consequences. And someone on Lockwood Street was running out of houses to test. When the next line was carved, the shape would close. And whatever waited at its center would finally be revealed. Chapter 5. Lockwood Street started turning on itself. Fear did not arrive all at once. It seeped like water under a door. By the fifth day of the blackout, Lockwood Street no longer looked like the same neighborhood. Lawns were trampled from packing. Sleep deprivation hollowed faces. The yellow crime scene tape had become permanent decor, fluttering like a warning no one could ignore. And now the symbol curved dangerously close to the center. 5 houses marked. 2 families dead. 1 spared intentionally. And the power company still promising restoration within 24 hours. The phrase had become an insult. That morning, an argument erupted in broad daylight. It began quietly, Mrs. Whittaker accusing the teenagers from number 8 of wandering too far during patrol shifts. It escalated when Daniel insisted someone had to be feeding information to the killer. "He's too precise," Daniel said, voice cracking. "He knows our rotations. He knows when police leave. That's not luck." "You're saying one of us is helping him," Mr. Whittaker snapped. "I'm saying someone's careless." Careless? The word landed like a stone. Mara stood at the edge of the gathering, arms folded tightly across her chest. She could feel it, the fracture spreading. The killer didn't need to enter another home to do damage. The street was doing that part for him. By afternoon, the neighborhood had divided into unofficial factions. Those who believed in increasing patrols. Those who wanted to evacuate temporarily. And those who whispered that someone among them was involved. Suspicion became contagious. When a white van idled briefly at the entrance to the cul-de-sac, 3 men rushed it with baseball bats before realizing it was a cable company vehicle rerouted from another district. The driver sped away, shaken. Later, Daniel cornered Mara in her driveway. "You've been mapping it, haven't you?" he asked quietly. Her silence answered him. "It's forming something," he continued. "I see it too, it's not random." "No," she said, "it is." "You think it's you?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "The center." She didn't respond, because saying it aloud would make it solid. Instead, she said, "Every house teaches him something." Daniel swallowed. That night, patrol groups tripled. Flashlights crisscrossed constantly. Whistles blew at 15-minute intervals. 2 residents positioned themselves at the wooded trail entrance with folding chairs and hunting rifles. But fear has a rhythm. And once it settles in, it changes behavior in subtle ways. At 11:08 p.m., Mrs. Calder from number 3 forgot to latch her back door after bringing in a trash bin. At 12:14 a.m., one of the patrol volunteers stepped away to take a phone call, leaving a gap in coverage near number 15. At 1:22 a.m., an argument broke out mid-shift between Daniel and Mr. Whittaker over direction changes. Routine fractured. Focus blurred. Fear is louder than reason. Mara remained awake upstairs, lights off, watching through a narrow slit in her curtain. She noticed something the others didn't. The patrol beams overlapped chaotically now. Too many lights. Too many voices. The street had become noisy. And noise creates blind spots. At 2:43 a.m., the hunting rifle stationed near the wooded trail discharged accidentally. The sound detonated through the cul-de-sac like a bomb. Patrol members scattered, shouting. Someone screamed. Someone fell. But it was a misfire. No intruder. Just nerves. Police arrived, irritated, stretched thin. "You're going to hurt each other before he does," one officer muttered. He wasn't wrong. At 3:17 a.m., no scream came. But at 3:19 a.m., a different sound cut through the chaos. Glass. Soft. Controlled. Not shattered, lifted. Myra's breath caught. The noise hadn't come from the perimeter. It came from inside the curve. Number 11. A house directly opposite hers. She saw it happen. A shadow moved across the second-floor window from the inside. Not outside. Inside. He hadn't entered through the front this time. He had slipped in during the patrol confusion. The screams followed seconds later. Raw. Close. Terrifyingly close. Flashlights converged too late. The killer exited not through the back fence, not through the trail, but calmly through the front door while patrol members rushed the rear. He walked straight down the sidewalk, blended into darkness, and disappeared. When the symbol was carved this time, it completed nearly 3/4 of a circle. A tightening spiral. Closer. Always closer. Myra stood inches from number 11's door as the carving caught early dawn light. The lines were steady, unhurried, even after killing, even with patrols armed and frantic. He had adapted again, studied chaos, exploited distraction. He wasn't just learning doors anymore. He was learning them. Their reactions, their tempers, their fear thresholds. Lockwood Street wasn't a neighborhood now. It was a laboratory. By sunrise, accusations erupted openly. You fired that gun too soon. You left your post. You changed the route without telling us. Voices rose, hands shoved. Old grievances resurfaced, property disputes, unpaid loans, petty insults from years prior. The killer had not just carved wood. He had carved trust. Mara stepped back from the shouting and looked at the cul-de-sac from the center. From here, she could see it clearly. Marked houses forming an arc. The inward pull tightening. Only 3 homes remained untouched, including hers. Her phone buzzed with the same sterile update. Restoration expected within 24 hours. She stared at it, then at the nearest carved door. 24 hours was no longer a delay. It was a deadline. Because if the spiral closed before the lights returned, there would be no more rehearsal. Only performance. That evening, the patrols dissolved entirely. No one agreed on shifts. No one trusted assignments. Doors shut earlier. Windows double-locked. Curtains drawn tight. Silence reclaimed the street, but it was different now. Heavy, resentful, divided. Myra stood in her living room, staring at her own front door. She imagined the blade pressing into it. Measured, deliberate. She imagined neighbors hesitating, arguing, distracted. Fear is louder than reason. And reason was nearly gone. At 2:58 a.m., footsteps approached her porch again. No patrol lights. No whistles. No arguing voices. Just the quiet confidence of someone who understood that the neighborhood was now too fractured to function. The metal touched her door this time. Not testing. Not hovering. Pressing. Once. Twice. A shallow groove formed. A beginning. Mara did not scream. She did not move. Because she understood something the others didn't. He didn't want panic. He wanted inevitability. The blade lifted. The footsteps retreated. But the first line had been drawn. The spiral was closing. And Lockwood Street had already torn itself apart. Now it only needed one final push. Chapter 6. The night the police finally stayed and still failed. By the 6th night, Lockwood Street no longer trusted itself. So it asked the city to stay. 2 patrol cars parked at the entrance to the cul-de-sac before sunset. Another cruiser idled halfway down the curve, positioned between number 11 and number 15. A visible barrier, a statement of presence. Portable floodlights were unloaded from a utility truck and angled toward the darkest stretches of sidewalk. For the first time in nearly a week, artificial light returned to the street. Harsh white industrial. It didn't feel like safety. It felt like interrogation. Mara stood at her upstairs window and watched officers walk the perimeter, boots heavy against asphalt. Radios crackled. Flashlights cut clean lines across siding and hedges. "They won't try tonight," Mrs. Whitaker said from below, her voice carrying as she spoke to a cluster of neighbors. "Not with police sitting right there." Mara didn't answer, because the killer had never struck where attention was strongest. He struck where confidence was. Darkness doesn't create monsters. It removes consequences. But what happens when consequences return? They adapt. At 8:14 p.m., an officer knocked on Mara's door. "We'll be conducting interior checks if you're comfortable," he said, "just to clear blind spots." She nodded and stepped aside. Two officers moved through her house methodically. They checked closets, basement, garage. They tested window locks and examined the shallow groove etched into her front door from the night before. "You reported this?" one asked. "No." He studied her face briefly but didn't press. Outside, the floodlights hummed steadily. The wooded trail entrance glowed like a surgical room. The back fence at number 6 had been temporarily reinforced with plywood and metal brackets. Every known weakness addressed. Every previous lesson countered. At 10:32 p.m. the group chat buzzed. "Feels safer tonight. Finally. Should have done this sooner." The phrase "within 24 hours" didn't appear for the first time all week. Because for once, no one was waiting for the power company. They believed they had solved it. Mara didn't go to bed. She sat in the hallway outside her bedroom with her back against the wall, listening to the altered soundscape. Police radios replaced generator hum. Boots replaced packing neighbors. It was louder than previous nights. More confident. At 1:03 a.m., one of the cruisers repositioned slightly, its headlights briefly sweeping across her house. At 1:47 a.m., an officer walked past her porch, shining a beam across her windows. At 2:15 a.m., another interior check was conducted at number 15. He would not strike tonight, Mara thought. Not here. At 2:58 a.m., the floodlight nearest the wooded trail flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. An officer walked toward it, adjusting the cable connection. At 3:06 a.m., the cruiser at the entrance received a radio call, disturbance 2 blocks over. Non-related but requiring acknowledgement. One unit pulled away temporarily. At 3:11 a.m., the remaining cruiser shifted position slightly to cover the entrance gap. The floodlight near the trail flickered again. Longer this time. Then died. "Probably overload," someone muttered. At 3:14 a.m., a breaker inside number 11's temporary lighting unit tripped, the extension cords running from a generator placed earlier by police. The house went dark again. Only that house. A pocket of shadow returned to the spiral. At 3:17 a.m., Mara heard the sound. Not glass. Not a scream. A door clicking shut. Inside number 11. But police had cleared that house hours earlier. It had remained empty since the previous murder. Or so everyone believed. At 3:18 a.m. the scream came. Not from number 11. From number 13. A house that had not yet been marked. The officers reacted instantly. Flashlights converged. Boots pounded pavement. One officer rushed the front door while another circled to the back. The door was locked. They forced it open. Inside, chaos. Furniture overturned. Blood along the hallway. But no intruder. No broken windows. No shattered glass. And then someone noticed it. The back closet. Its door slightly ajar. Officers approached carefully, weapons raised. They pulled it open. Empty. But the drywall behind the hanging coats had been cut away days earlier. A crawl space, connecting to the neighboring vacant house at number 11. He had entered earlier. Before the police stayed. Before the floodlights. Before anyone believed this night would be different. He had hidden in the wall. Waiting. Studying patrol routes from within. Listening to radios. Timing responses. At 3:26 a.m., as officers searched number 11 in disbelief, a new scream erupted. From outside, they rushed back into the street and froze, because number 13's front door now bore the carving. Fresh, deep, extended further inward than ever before. And at the base of the symbol, a new line had been added. Horizontal, cutting across, closing the spiral's final gap. Myra stood on her porch, unable to move. The floodlights illuminated the carving brutally, exposing every detail. The symbol was complete. A circle drawn from the outer arc inward. All roads converging. All lines pointing to the center of the cul-de-sac. To her, an officer swore under his breath. He was inside the whole time, Daniel whispered hoarsely from somewhere behind her. Yes, he had adapted. He had studied their adjustments and found a new blind spot. Confidence. Police presence had not deterred him. It had provided cover. Because no one suspects the house already cleared. No one guards what they believe is empty. Darkness doesn't create monsters. It removes consequences. But light does not stop them. It simply forces them to plan better. As dawn approached, officers combed the crawl space again. They found discarded gloves, a utility knife, a small battery-powered headlamp, and something else. A folded piece of paper. A printed layout of Lockwood Street, with houses circled, and one circled twice. Number 17. Mara's breath left her slowly. He had not been improvising. He had been orbiting. And now the orbit was complete. The power company's update arrived at 9:02 a.m. Restoration expected within 24 hours. But it no longer mattered. Because the symbol was finished. The rehearsal was over. And if this week had been preparation, then whatever came next would not be another test. It would be the performance. That evening, police presence remained heavy. But Mara understood something chilling as she stared at the completed carving across the street. He had done it. Under their watch. Inside their perimeter. Within reach of their radios and guns. He had stayed. And still succeeded. As night fell again over Lockwood Street, she locked her door and whispered into the dark. He wanted you here. Because now they all believed the worst had already happened. Now they all believed the spiral was complete. But spirals do not end. They tighten. And at the very center, something waits. Chapter 7. He wanted a survivor. By the 7th day, the fear had changed shape. It was no longer sharp and explosive. It was patient. Settled. Like something that had already made up its mind. Police remained stationed at both ends of Lockwood Street. Portable lighting rigs hummed through the afternoon. Officers moved in and out of homes with a rhythm that tried to mimic control. But the symbol across the carved doors remained untouched. No one sanded it down. No one covered it. It stood there like a completed equation. And at its center sat number 17. Mara's house. She had not slept. She had replayed every night in sequence, every beam of light, every pause outside her porch, every shallow scratch on her door. He could have entered. Twice at least. Her garage door had once been left open for 15 minutes during the second day of the blackout. Her side gate latch had been found loosened on the third. He had touched her door the night before the spiral closed. He had tested. He had hovered. And each time, he had chosen not to finish it. He wanted her alive. The realization did not hit her like a scream. It arrived quietly, like a truth that had been waiting for her to stop denying it. Outside, Daniel approached her porch slowly. They found more prints in the crawl space, he said. Different sizes. He's been moving through multiple houses. Before the attacks, Mara replied. Daniel's silence confirmed it. He had been staging the spiral long before the blackout. The outage had simply been the curtain drop. Why skip you? Daniel asked finally. Mara held his gaze. Because performances need witnesses. The word hung between them. Performance. By evening, police advised residents to consider temporary relocation. Hotels were filling. Some families packed overnight bags. Others refused to leave out of stubborn pride or fear of looting. Mara stayed. Not because she felt brave, but because she felt certain. If she left, he would adjust. If she stayed, he would come. And she needed to understand something before that happened. She returned to her dining table and spread out her maps again. This time, she added timestamps. 3:17 a.m. Each murder clustered within minutes of it. But the marked only houses number 3, number 15, had been carved slightly earlier. Practice strokes. Refinement. He had been narrowing not just geography, but timing. She circled 3:17 repeatedly until the ink tore through the paper. At 8:46 p.m., the floodlights flickered again. Brief. Subtle. Repaired quickly. At 9:12 p.m., police shifted rotation. At 10:03 p.m., an officer conducted another interior sweep of her home. Mara watched carefully as he checked her closets. He did not examine the crawlspace above her garage, because it had not yet been used. At 11:38 p.m., the street quieted unnaturally. No arguments. No whispers. Just the low mechanical hum of temporary power and distant radios. Calm. Manufactured. At 1:27 a.m., Mara turned off every light inside her house. She wanted to see what he saw. From the outside, her home became another dark silhouette within the spiral. She stood in her upstairs hallway and whispered to the empty air. I know. It wasn't bravado. It was acknowledgement. At 2:59 a.m., something shifted in the street. Not footsteps. Not a beam of light. Absence. One of the police cruisers repositioned to assist a call half a mile away. Temporary. Routine. The second cruiser remained at the entrance. Floodlights continued humming. At 3:11 a.m. the hum stuttered. Not fully failing. Just dimming. Like a breath held. Mara's heart slowed instead of racing. Because this time, she wasn't waiting to be surprised. She was waiting to confirm. At 3:15 a.m. she heard it. From inside the house. Not at the door. Above. A faint shift in the attic insulation. A careful redistribution of weight. He had entered earlier. During one of the routine interior sweeps. Before police settled in. Before neighbors believed in safety again. He had hidden. Like he had before. But this time, he wasn't in an adjacent wall. He was above her. At 3:16 a.m., a soft thud landed in the hallway outside her bedroom. She did not scream. She stepped back slowly, positioning herself near the narrow doorway that led to the small storage room at the end of the hall. At 3:17 a.m., her bedroom door opened. Deliberately, slowly, she heard his breathing first. Measured, unhurried. He wasn't rushing, because this wasn't chaos. It was choreography. Her front door remained untouched. No carving yet, because the symbol was complete. This wasn't another mark on the spiral. This was the center. She stepped into the storage room silently and pulled the door nearly shut, leaving a sliver open. Through it she saw him. Mask, dark clothing, movements economical and precise. He paused in her bedroom doorway, scanning the space. He didn't look surprised to find the bed empty. He looked intrigued, as if the audience had moved before curtain rise. He stepped into the hallway, stopped, tilted his head slightly. Listening. Myra held her breath until her lungs burned. He moved toward the front of the house, toward the stairs, toward the door. She followed at a distance, barefoot, silent. At the base of the staircase, he removed something from his pocket. A blade. Clean. Sharp. He approached her front door, and for the first time, pressed it fully into the wood. The carving began. Slow. Intentional. The final line, completing the spiral physically, declaring it finished. But he wasn't done, because he hadn't yet secured what he came for. A witness. A survivor. The door groaned softly under the pressure of the blade. Outside, the cruiser's headlights shifted slightly. No one noticed, because no one expected the performance to happen under guard. He finished the final stroke and stepped back, admiring it. Then he turned, and this time he walked back toward the staircase, toward the living space, toward her. He knew she was there. Not precisely where, but he knew. He moved slowly, deliberately checking doorways, enjoying it, because rehearsals build tension. But opening night demands reaction. Mara's mind moved faster than her fear. He had spared her before. He needed her, and that need was leverage. As his footsteps approached the storage room, she whispered just loud enough to reach him. I understand the pattern. He stopped. Silence stretched between them. Then, for the first time, he spoke. Not loudly. Not distorted. Calm. Good. A single word. Affirmation. He stepped closer to the door. The blade remained low, not raised. He didn't want her dead. He wanted her aware. And as the handle began to turn, Mara realized something chilling. He had never intended to kill her first. He intended to leave her last. Because every performance needs someone who remembers it. And he wanted her to remember everything. The door creaked open an inch. Then two. And in the darkness between them, Mara saw not just a killer, but a man waiting for applause. Outside, the floodlights flickered again. And this time, they went completely dark. Chapter 8. The blackout was no accident. When the lights died completely, the street did not scream. It exhaled. The floodlights outside Mara's house blinked once, twice, then surrendered. The police cruiser at the entrance dimmed into silhouette. Radios crackled with confused static. Inside number 17, the hallway fell into absolute dark. The storage room door hung open 2 inches. The masked man stood on the other side. Neither moved. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of cooling metal somewhere in the house, the subtle contraction of structure after artificial light had vanished again. Then calmly he stepped back. not retreating, allowing space. Mara felt it instantly. This was not panic. This was orchestration. "You cut it," she said softly into the dark. A pause. Then that same even voice. "Yes." Not defensive. Not proud. Just factual. Because this was not chaos. It was control. He had not simply taken advantage of the blackout. He had created it. The realization clicked into place with cold precision. The transformer explosion on the first night had not been random failure. It had been preparation. She pictured the panel at the end of the street, the bolts loosened days earlier, the van someone thought they'd seen, the cable company vehicle mistaken for coincidence. An electrician would know exactly where to apply force, exactly how to fracture a transformer without causing a citywide surge alert, exactly how long emergency crews would take. Within 24 hours. The phrase had never been reassurance. It had been a countdown. He stepped farther into the hallway, blade lowered, posture relaxed. He did not rush her. He did not grab. He walked past the storage room, past her, toward the staircase, and descended, leaving her alive upstairs, inviting her to follow. A performance needs an audience. Her legs trembled, but she moved, barefoot on the stairs, silent. When she reached the living room, he was standing at the front door, fingertips brushing the freshly carved spiral. The final line gleamed faintly in the residual moonlight filtering through the window. "It's finished," she said. "Yes." "And you needed me to see it." "Yes." He turned slightly enough that she could see the outline of his mask more clearly now. Fabric, not elaborate, practical. "You mapped it," he said. "I saw the paper in your trash." Her stomach tightened. He had been inside earlier. During daylight. During police sweeps. "You're not careless," he continued. "You observe. And you wanted to be observed." Silence. Then, "Witnesses preserve structure." Structure. The word sounded almost academic. Like an architect defending design. "You sabotaged the transformer," she said. "Yes." "You cut the floodlights tonight." "Yes." "You were in the walls days before the first murder." A pause. Then, "Yes." Every admission was steady. Measured. He did not boast. He confirmed. Because to him, this was not confession. It was documentation. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, not approaching yet. Officers were likely scrambling to understand why power had failed again despite generators. The street was blind once more. She took another step closer, careful not to provoke. "Why Lockwood?" she asked. He tilted his head slightly. "Because it's symmetrical." Her breath caught. Symmetrical. A perfect cul-de-sac, predictable routines, identical entryways, standardized locks, houses built by the same contractor. A neighborhood designed for aesthetic balance. He had chosen it for its geometry. "For weeks," he continued quietly, "I studied the grid, the load timing, which homes upgraded panels, which did not." Electrician. Of course. The folded map in the crawlspace. The precise generator cuts. The confidence around wiring. He had likely installed half the systems here years earlier. He knew the bones of the street. Darkness doesn't create monsters. It removes consequences. But planning creates inevitability. "You could have killed me on the second night," she said. "Yes." "You didn't." "No." "Why?" He stepped closer. Not threatening. "Not yet." "Because someone has to understand the pattern," he said. Otherwise it's wasted. The words chilled her more than the blade. This had never been about rage. Not about thrill. It was about completion. Architecture demands recognition. Outside, a single cruiser engine roared to life. Officers were regrouping. Time was shortening. He glanced briefly toward the window, not worried. Aware. You'll survive, he said calmly. You'll tell it correctly. You're assuming I won't fight. A faint shift in posture. Almost amusement. You will. He raised the blade slightly then, not in attack but in demonstration. You've already altered your behavior, locked differently, staggered lights, you anticipated. Because she had learned. And learning was the final variable he needed to test. Her survival wasn't mercy. It was proof. Proof that the spiral tightened logically. Proof that fear modifies structure. Proof that his design reshaped human behavior. You're not done, she said. A long pause. Then, no. Of course not. Spirals don't end. They expand. Sirens grew louder now. Approaching. Real. He moved toward the back of the house, not hurried but efficient. She followed again, unable to stop herself. In the kitchen, he paused at the breaker panel. He opened it with practiced ease. Flipped 2 switches. Closed it. Outside, the floodlights at the far end of the cul-de-sac flickered back on briefly, then surged and blew out again. A misdirect. Officers would rush there. He opened the back door quietly. Before stepping out, he looked at her once more. You were the center, he said. Not affectionately. Not menacingly. Factually. Then he slipped into the yard. Into the darkness beyond the plywood-reinforced fence. Into the wooded trail that had been tested days ago. Mara ran to the front window. Police were flooding the wrong end of the street. Radios shouting. Confusion reigniting. He had engineered the blackout. Engineered the patrol shifts. Engineered their confidence. And now he had engineered his exit. But he had left something behind. On her front door. The completed spiral. And beneath it, barely visible in the grain, a new mark. Small. Intentional. A second, smaller spiral beginning at the base. She stared at it as officers pounded on her door moments later. Are you okay? Did he come through here? Voices overlapped. Hands gripped her shoulders. Flashlights searched rooms. Questions fired. She answered none of them fully. Because her mind was locked on that new carving. The spiral wasn't finished. It had only shifted scale. The blackout had never been misfortune. It had been foundation. The rehearsals had never been about individual houses. They had been about control. And now, as generators sputtered uselessly and officers tried to restore order once more, Mara understood the final layer. He had not just mapped the street. He had mapped them. Their delays. Their overconfidence. Their dependence on electricity. And he had proven something terrifyingly simple. When structure collapses, people do the rest. Darkness doesn't create monsters. It removes consequences. But design ensures they return. As the sirens finally stilled and dawn threatened the horizon, Mara stood alone in her doorway staring at the completed spiral. And the smaller one beneath it. He wasn't finished. He had just scaled the pattern. And somewhere beyond the tree line, in another grid of identical houses, he was already measuring the next center. Chapter 9. The final house was always mine. By morning, Lockwood Street looked like a crime scene that had swallowed itself. Police tape layered over older tape. Forensics units moved in careful grids across lawns that had once held barbecues and birthday banners. Officers photographed Mara's door from every angle, measuring the spiral, documenting the smaller one beneath it. No one said the word pattern out loud, but everyone felt it. Mara sat on her front steps wrapped in a blanket someone had handed her. Her hair was still damp with sweat. Her eyes hadn't blinked in minutes. "He spoke to you," an officer asked gently. She nodded. "What did he say?" She hesitated, because what he said mattered less than how he said it. Calm, certain, complete. "He said I was the center," she replied. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. They thought it was delusion, trauma distortion, survivor's shock. But Mara knew better. The final house was always hers. Not because she was special, but because she was observant. He had seen her mapping, seen her studying. She had reacted correctly, and that made her the ideal witness. By noon, the power company finally restored electricity. Not gradually, all at once. Lights blinked on across Lockwood Street in sterile unison. Refrigerators hummed back to life. Security systems rebooted, cameras reactivating with cheerful chimes. The street exhaled. But it wasn't relief. It was exposure. Because now the carved symbols were fully visible in daylight and artificial light. Clear, undeniable. The spiral looked almost elegant across the curve of houses. It was impossible not to see it once you stepped into the center of the cul-de-sac. And when you stood where Mara stood, at number 17, it felt intentional. Engineered. Police escorted her inside to retrieve essentials, while forensic teams dusted for prints. Her house no longer felt like home. It felt staged. In her bedroom, officers discovered faint scuff marks in the attic insulation, evidence of where he had waited. In the garage crawlspace, they found a small hook screwed discreetly into a beam. Unused. Waiting. Her stomach tightened. A hook, just like the symbol's curved line. Not random. Never random. Daniel approached her cautiously later that afternoon. "They're saying he's gone," he said. "Highway cameras picked up a van leaving around 4 a.m. Could be him." Could be. The phrase meant nothing now, because leaving didn't mean ending. She walked slowly to the center of the cul-de-sac and turned in a slow circle. Every marked door faced inward toward her. Every carved line converged. The spiral wasn't meant to be viewed from above. It was meant to be felt from here. At the center. "I think he wanted me to stand here," she said quietly. Daniel followed her gaze. "This isn't about you," he insisted. "It is. But not in the way he thought. This wasn't obsession. It was completion." That evening, reporters arrived in clusters, microphones extended, questions layered over one another. "How did you survive? Did you see his face? Do you feel safe now that the power's restored?" Safe. The word felt absurd, because safety was what Lockwood Street had believed in before the blackout. Cameras, lights, locks. Structure. And he had dismantled all of it methodically. That night, for the first time in a week, the street was illuminated fully. Porch lights burned bright. Street lamps cast clean halos over pavement. The spiral on the doors looked almost theatrical under the glow. Police presence reduced slightly, enough to suggest confidence had returned. But Mara didn't feel comforted. She stood at her upstairs window again, staring at the street. Waiting. Not for him. For understanding. At 3:17 a.m. nothing happened. No flicker. No scream. Just quiet. Her heartbeat slowed slightly. Perhaps he had truly left. Perhaps the pattern had concluded. At 3:22 a.m. her phone buzzed. A message in the neighborhood group chat. From an unknown number. Just an image. A photograph. Grainy. Taken from above. A cul-de-sac. Not Lockwood Street. But similar. Identical architecture. Identical symmetry. And faintly visible on one front door. A shallow carved hook. Beginning. Her breath froze. The message disappeared seconds later. Deleted. Daniel texted immediately. Did you see that? Yes. She had seen it. The spiral wasn't finished. It had relocated. Scaled outward. The smaller spiral beneath her door hadn't been continuation within Lockwood. It was migration. He wasn't done. He was replicating. And she understood something terrible in that moment. She wasn't the center because he needed a victim. She was the center because he needed a historian. Someone who could see the pattern repeating. Someone who would recognize it elsewhere. He had chosen her to carry the structure forward. To notice when it began again. At 3:30 a.m., a news alert buzzed across her screen. Transformer explosion reported in neighboring district. Several homes without power. Within 24 hours. The phrase returned like a curse. Mara stepped away from the window slowly. Her house was intact. Her door carved but unbroken. She had survived. But survival felt like assignment, not luck. The final house was always hers. Not because he wanted her dead, but because he wanted her aware. She moved to her front door and ran her fingers along the spiral. Then along the smaller one beneath it. The blade marks were smooth. Confident. And as she traced the curve, she felt the truth settle fully into place. Rehearsal wasn't about Lockwood Street. It was about perfecting the method. Lockwood had been prototype. She had been proof. And somewhere, in another symmetrical cul-de-sac, already sinking into engineered darkness. Opening night was about to begin again. At 3:17 a.m. Exactly on time. Chapter 10, Every door hides a scream. 3 nights later, the next neighborhood went dark. Not Lockwood Street, but Briar's Edge 12 miles west. The transformer explosion happened at 9:41 p.m. 1 minute earlier than Lockwood. Improvement. Mara was the first to see the news alert. She was also the first to understand what it meant. By then, she hadn't slept properly in 72 hours. She had stopped answering reporters, stopped reassuring neighbors, stopped pretending that the spiral carved into her door was something that belonged to the past. Because patterns don't end. They iterate. She drove to Briar's Edge before dawn. She didn't tell police. She didn't tell Daniel. She followed the geometry. The cul-de-sac was nearly identical, same curvature, same spacing between homes, same ornamental trees lining the arc. Different paint colors. Different families. Same symmetry. Police were already blocking the entrance, but chaos creates gaps. She parked 2 streets away and walked. The air smelled faintly metallic. She didn't need confirmation. She saw it immediately. The first door. Marked. A shallow hook carved into pale blue wood. Not deep yet. Not extended. A beginning. He had scaled it down. Cleaner entry point. Faster execution. No need for multiple rehearsals this time. Lockwood had taught him enough. An officer stepped into her path. "Ma'am, this area is restricted." "I know what he's doing," she said. They had heard that before. Trauma survivors attach meaning to chaos. But she wasn't guessing. She was recognizing. Count the houses, she said. Measure the arc. He'll move clockwise. He'll test 3 entry points. He'll mark one without entering to adjust spacing. The officer hesitated, because confidence sounds different from hysteria. Within minutes, she was pulled aside, questioned, cross-checked. When they confirmed she was the Lockwood survivor, the tone shifted. "How do you know?" one detective asked. "Because he needed me to understand," she replied. The power company released a statement at 10:12 a.m. Restoration expected within 24 hours. The phrase landed like a ritual incantation. Mara stepped into the center of Briar's Edge. The geometry tightened around her again. But this time she was not passive. This time she anticipated. At 2:00 a.m., Briar's Edge implemented patrol shifts. At 2:40 a.m., Mara insisted officers search attic crawlspaces, not adjacent homes. They found fresh insulation disturbance in number 8. He was already inside, waiting earlier than before. Improvement. At 3:10 a.m., floodlights were adjusted to eliminate blind zones. At 3:14 a.m., a generator cable was checked preemptively. At 3:16 a.m., Mara stood inside number 8's hallway, heart steady. She wasn't guessing anymore. She was intercepting. The attic panel shifted above them. A soft displacement of weight. An officer raised his weapon. "Police, come down." Silence. Then movement. But not toward the panel. Toward the back of the house. He had cut an alternative exit earlier. Of course. Improvement. He dropped through the pantry ceiling instead. Vast. Precise. Faster than Lockwood. He moved toward the front door, blade already in hand. But this time, the center was occupied. Officers closed in from both ends of the hallway. Mara stood frozen as he paused, evaluating. Not panicked. Adjusting. He looked at her. Recognition. "You came," he said calmly. "Yes," she replied. "You understood." "Yes." For the first time, something flickered behind the mask. Not fear. Not anger. Disappointment. Because the pattern had been interrupted. Because rehearsal had produced resistance. Because the audience had stepped onto the stage. Officers lunged. He moved with startling speed, slashing one arm, ducking beneath another. He wasn't reckless. He was calculating escape vectors. But Briar's Edge had fewer trees behind its cul-de-sac. Fewer blind turns. Less buffer. Lockwood had been ideal. This one was flawed. He reached the front door. Pressed the blade into it once, a reflex. A need to mark. But before he could complete even the first stroke, officers tackled him to the ground. The blade skidded across tile. Metal against ceramic. Sharp. Final. He did not scream. He did not thrash wildly. Even pinned beneath 3 bodies, he seemed observant, as if committing the failure to memory. Outside, sirens crescendoed. Lights bathed the cul-de-sac in red and blue. Mara stepped forward slowly as they pulled the mask from his face. He was exactly what she expected. Ordinary. Late 30s. Calloused hands. Eyes not wild, analytical. An electrician's hands. A designer's gaze. "You stopped the spiral," he said quietly as they cuffed him. "For now," she replied. He almost smiled. Because he understood something she did too. Arrest does not erase structure. He had refined a method. Proven it works. Others could study it. Replicate it. Darkness doesn't create monsters. It removes consequences. But structure can be copied. Weeks later, Lockwood Street replaced its doors, sanded away carvings, repainted facades, installed better cameras, stronger panels, brighter floodlights. But some residents moved anyway. Because once you see the pattern, you never stand in a cul-de-sac the same way again. Mara remained, not out of attachment, out of vigilance. She kept the carved piece of her original door, cut cleanly from its hinges before replacement. The spiral mounted in her garage. A reminder, a warning. Every 3:17 a.m. she wakes briefly, listens, then sleeps again. The man who engineered the blackout now sits in a concrete cell. No tools, no panels, no symmetry. But sometimes in interviews, he speaks calmly about geometry, about repetition, about how easily neighborhoods confuse lighting with safety. And Mara knows something he doesn't. The pattern failed once, because she saw it, because she stepped into the center, because she refused to be an audience. But somewhere, in some perfectly curved street built by the same contractors who value aesthetic symmetry over unpredictability, there will be another outage, another promise of restoration within 24 hours, another resident who believes it's temporary. And when the lights go out, when the cameras blink dead, when the silence stretches just a little too long, someone will test the first door. Not out of rage, not out of impulse, but out of design. And if no one notices the geometry forming, if no one stands in the center and understands, the spiral will close again. Because every door hides a scream, and every street believes it will never be theirs. Until 3:17 a.m. Exactly on time.
Closing chapter.
Lockwood Street believed safety was infrastructure. Lights, cameras, security systems, familiar neighbors. But safety was never the wiring, it was vigilance. The butcher didn't just kill families. He studied hesitation. He exploited routine. He rehearsed weakness. And when the darkness came, it didn't create him. It revealed him. Every door on that street had a lock. Every home had an alarm. Every family thought violent was something that happened somewhere else. Until it didn't. So tonight, before you go to bed, ask yourself one question. If the lights went out right now, would your house protect you? Or has someone already been studying it? Because every door hides a scream, and some rehearsals only need one final act. If this story unsettled you, good. Subscribe, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the dark.